Hi, I'm Jennifer Sir. Welcome to the Sewing Room and our Sustainable Fashion and Sewing series. Today I'm speaking with Radha Weaver from the Sewing Through Fog blog. She's a passionate maker who left the fashion industry to embrace a more mindful and sustainable approach to sewing. We'll discuss reducing textile waste, sourcing secondhand textiles, and taking small, impactful steps toward sustainability. Whether you're new to sewing or experienced, Radha shares practical tips on mending, upcycling, and making conscious fashion choices. Let's dive in. Hi, Radha. Welcome to the
Hi,
Sewing.
Jennifer.
um, I'm so excited that you're here today. I love your blog and I love your whole vibe and this whole denim thing that you have going on. It makes me really happy just to look in your background and see your quilts and your jacket on your dress form. Can you tell me a little bit about your journey and leaving the fashion industry?
Yeah, my background was creative, was more kind of like I went to school for costume design and I did a lot of sewing growing up, so it was very, handmade, kind of being really in touch with textiles and obviously going into the apparel industry was a big change, but living in the Bay Area, I needed healthcare and a 401k. And that's a decision I think a lot of people coming out of school have to make. And I went to work for Levi's, and I ended up being there for 15 years, which was not, I didn't necessarily intend to stay that long, but I really wanted to kind of learn just about the actual, like the industry itself and manufacturing and all the different pieces that were so different from my experience. And I didn't have a design role there. I had a business role. So I was in merchandising, um, and merchandising at every company's different, but at Levi's, you're really kind of you own the P&L, you're just responsible for all the financials. At the end of the day, like you're the one responsible if the company makes money or not. And so there's a lot of strategy and a lot of like working with different groups in the company, which was really interesting to me because I like to learn and do a lot of different things. But it was never somewhere I planned to stay for a long time because I always knew I kind of wanted to return um, to something that was more small business, something that was more sustainable, for lack of a better word. And but I really enjoyed my time there, and I don't regret it because it was an incredible learning experience, and it really set me up to be able to be successful now. So, I think like if I had gone from college to like, well, Instagram didn't even exist when I graduated college, but to like trying to have some type of online presence and educating people, like it never would have worked. So it really was, um, while I'm glad I'm not there anymore and I would never want to go back, I still am very grateful of kind of like what I was able to learn and my time there. Yeah, because it really helped me kind of round out my knowledge.
Was there a specific moment or experience that made you rethink your relationship with fashion and sustainability?
Yes, there was one that kind of put me on the track of leaving, even though it happened many years before I left, which was um, my first product development trip. It was in 2011, and it was like um, to Bangladesh, to Dhaka, to visit some of our factories there, or not. Levi's doesn't own their own factories, but some of the factories we used. And it was one of those moments where you see it's different to know things are a certain way. It's different to like see things written on a piece of paper, but to actually be their experience, like be actually experiencing it is so different. And for me, it was there was so many different parts of it, but just the amount, I mean, DACA, and that was many years ago, but it's still some of the same challenges. DACA is incredibly is growing and exploding with industry, but there is like such extreme poverty, and it's just the difference between, the people who own, I mean, there's a lot of parallels to a lot of different situations, but the difference between the people who own the factories and the people that were like driving us around and in like a black SUV with tinted windows, and then the people that are living like on the side of the road. It was so hard for me to see and actually experience firsthand and to understand. I mean, so Levi's has fairly good policies in place around they're called terms of engagement, and of how factory workers are treated, of how like the sustainability standards. They're one of the better denim brands or brands in the industry. But it's still, I mean, to see people and they're getting paid like $2 an hour and they're working, 10 to 12 hours a day. And again, this is the good factories. It was,
Yeah.
and just to see like the immensity, like I have this photo that I've shared, I think on my Instagram before, but it's just these rolls of denim that are probably 50 feet long, and there's just tons of them just piled in this giant kind of warehouse, and it's just like so immense. And then seeing kind of people working and making, hundreds of just the pocket of a pair of jeans. It felt it felt very real in terms of the amount of things that we were making and trying to put out into the world. And that, I think, so seeing it firsthand kind of made me be like, yeah, I'm not necessarily comfortable with how this all works. And I think the more I got promoted and the more visibility I had in the company, and I really started to understand, and this sounds kind of so naive, but how like a for-profit company works is like you're making decisions every day um, to make money, to try to get, Macy's to buy another 100,000 units of jeans. And you're like, but I don't actually, no one actually needs them, but you're trying to hit these numbers. And so the the denim and the artistry and the kind of fun of apparel became so much more about hitting numbers and trying to convince people to buy things. And the more I kind of learned about textile waste and just kind of the climate issues with denim industry, it's like the more you kind of start trying to balance these two things. And a little bit, it's like you're still living in a world where you need to pay your bills and you need to like support yourself, and you're working for a better company, but it's still kind of, it starts to wear on you, or at least for me, and it became really tough after a while.
Yeah, that's completely understandable. I worked at Gap and I did a trip to India in 2000, and it was quite an eye-opening experience. Yeah,
I
yeah,
mean, I think anyone who has the opportunity to do something like that, you should. And this is where like I respect Levi's, and I think it makes sense for people who are interested in the industry to work at a large company, because you will never be able to see these things.
right.
And I do think knowledge and just understanding how things work is really important. And it's not like suddenly every large apparel company is going to go away. So it's kind of like I'm a very kind of pragmatic person where, yes, I would love a world where no new clothes were ever created in factories, but that's not happening anytime in the near future. So like I try to recommend to people to to be part of it a little bit, to learn, to gain the knowledge of how things are done, and then maybe you can help kind of make a change.
Yeah, that's sort of what I'm trying to promote to high school students who are interested in fashion right now is learn what it's about and see what you can do to make a difference. Um, how has your approach to making changed since stepping away from the fashion industry?
Well, I would say it's funny because I didn't make anything the whole time I was at Levi's. So
There, I didn't make anything when I was at Gap, nothing except at the end. But yeah.
okay, what I did make is I had a dear friend who had two daughters, and for a couple years I made every one of their Halloween costumes. I probably made a couple pillows for my house, and I made my wedding dress, and that was it. Because like, I didn't have time. I mean, I
Yeah,
after I'd been there for maybe 5 or 6 years, I started traveling a lot, which was also an incredible benefit to being there, where I got to go all over the world to places I would never get to see. But yeah, my sewing machine was in my closet, barely ever got taken out. So for me, leaving, and I think why, even though I left Levi's 2021, so now almost like, well, it's like 3.5 years ago, I still every day am like, oh my gosh, I get to sew today? Like, are you kidding me? I like stopped sewing for 15, 20 years. Um, so I think it's more been like rediscovering sewing. And I'd never quilted before in my life either. I'd no idea even really like what a quilt was. That being said, though, I don't think, like, my instincts of how I make things were born when I was a kid. Like, so even though now, like, I could never imagine 5 years ago that I would be doing anything I'm doing now, but it makes sense because I've always been someone that reuse things, that like to transform things, that I don't like to do things the same way everybody else is. I like to kind of find something cool in my house and change it and do something with it. So that instinct I think was always there. It's just now that I actually get to use that more in what I'm doing.
that's wonderful. Um, how do you incorporate sustainability into your current sewing practice and everyday life?
Yeah, I mean, pretty extremely. And that's where, I mean, I don't buy any new fabric. I haven't bought new fabric in like two or more years. And but the thing I have to say though, um it's a little unfair because I already have such amazing fabric, where even though I wasn't sewing the whole time I was at Levi's, when I traveled, I would buy fabric. Like, I was always kind of collecting. And so I have so much amazing stuff. And I had sewing supplies, I had a Bernina, like, I had a lot of great tools and materials already. So when I say like I didn't buy anything, it wasn't like I was someone just trying to start sewing from nothing. Um, but so it's been fairly easy for me, but also, the main thing is I've figured out you can get everything you need secondhand. And that's kind of become one of the things that I do almost more than anything now, is just try to like help people find the materials they need secondhand. Because it's, yeah, I mean, I would say the thing that changed the most after the apparel industry is I also stopped buying new clothes, which, even though I've always been more like sustainability minded, I mean, working in the apparel industry 15 years, I bought so many clothes. And I would generally try to buy from more sustainable brands and be really conscious about what I was buying. And But I also had the money to invest in like really good quality stuff. And I knew how to sew. So if it needed to be mended or altered, I could do that. Um, but this idea of the only thing I really buy new now is thread. Um, just because, I mean, I think sometimes people, when they think about sustainability, they think about fiber content. And they're like, well, sustainability means buying organic cotton or buying things with different certifications. But it also means like using things that are good quality that are going to last. And that's why, like, I could go buy a bunch of really crappy vintage thread and I could use it in my really nice Bernina and it could mess up my machine. And then I would have to buy a new machine. So there are like decisions I think you have to think about in terms of like the quality of the stuff you use is sometimes almost as important as like where you got it because and this is where my mind has shifted to. I think sustainability is just as much about the life cycle of things and what you do with something after you get it than it is about like where you bought it and what it's made out of.
And where it came from. Yeah. Yeah. Like Vivian Westwood said, buy less, choose well, make it last. And I think that was like a really simplified thing, like to keep in mind when you're trying to make those decisions. And
Totally.
I think to be completely, sustainable is such an extreme, it can be such an
Yeah.
extreme thing. I mean, like I can take the recycling thing to the next level because I've always been really passionate about it, but not everyone in my household agrees with my approach. So um, it's hard to do that in sewing too, but you've got to be able to do what you can, I
Yeah,
think.
and I think also like you have there's a level of like humility you have to have because you are probably going to be like wrong about something. I just think back like 10, 15 years ago or 20 years ago, people thought, "Oh, we shouldn't buy leather. We should buy vegan leather, which is made out of plastic." And it's kind of like yeah, the leather industry is terrible, but you don't want to just make. So I think there's a lot of times like there have been trends or people deciding that a certain thing is better than and more sustainable than another thing, but it's so complicated. Like
Yeah,
you'll just lose. And that's why I generally, if someone is like thinking about being more sustainable or like trying to change things, I tell them to set really low expectations because the minute, I guess it's like eating healthy or something, at least for me, the minute I say, oh, I'm not going to eat any sugar or something, of course I'm going to eat sugar. And then like you do, and then you're like, feel bad about it. The same thing with being sustainable. You have to just make like little steps and find out what works for you. That is actually going to make things happen versus suddenly trying to be so extreme about it and it's just too hard.
yeah. Many home sewists struggle with waste. What are some of your favorite ways to minimize textile waste and make more responsible fabric choices?
So this is an interesting one because I kind of come at this in a different perspective, which is if you are upcycling or you're reusing things, you kind of don't have to worry about it as much. And what I mean by that is like if you're using materials that you kind of saved from a landfill, if you use three-quarters of those materials and end up, I'm not saying to do it, but end up like throwing the rest away, you're still helping the planet. So it's kind of like that's where I kind of think a lot about some of these ideas that we've put out there as missing the bigger picture a little bit. So I mean, I just tend to find quilting itself is actually a really good way to use scraps because quilting versus apparel sewing lends itself to using these weird little shaped pieces.
Right.
But I'm just not as occasionally, if I have like some scraps left over, I will toss them because they're not new fabric that I bought. They're like a pair of jeans that was falling apart that someone had in the back of their truck and they gave to me. So I think like you kind of changing the conversation a little bit, or upcycling in general takes a little bit of pressure off. Um, I do think that for anyone who has never quilted before, and I was talking to a sewist about this a while ago, it's kind of like apparel sewing and quilters are kind of are really good partners, or like kind of symbiotic, because making, and I like, you can kind of, on this jacket that I have, like everything is kind of pieced from, odd shaped pieces, but quilting itself is just a really easy way to use like scraps and leftover parts and like things that are a lot of different colors, bringing them together. So I think like that's one way. I think the fallback thing is always like stuffing things. And I know there's some really good patterns out there um, that are specifically made. I mean, I like stuff pillows with scraps sometimes that I can't use, but then like how many pillows do you need? So at there's yeah, but you I and then kind of the next piece, which is a little bit harder to talk about because there aren't as many good resources out there, but there are starting to pop up a lot of textile recycling places that either, I mean, in the Bay Area, like I use Ridwell,
Yeah, we do.
and they have like a threads bag, but it's still, you have to be careful about not putting anything too small. But that is something I think to keep in mind and always keep your eye out for is reputable places that use that turn those into shoddy, which is like something that's used in um, the construction industry, or like actually have a way to kind of recycle some of those fibers. Um, yeah, so I mean that it's not, there isn't like a really easy, clear answer for that one, but I think that there's a lot of kind of little things you can do.
Yeah, and I think Ridwell actually partners with Goodwill, and Goodwill, whatever they won't sell, I don't think it's Goodwill everywhere, unfortunately.
Hmm.
I think it's Goodwill maybe at least in California, but whatever they can't resell, they sell off to a fabric mulcher or a fabric recycler, like you were saying, and they do have ways of using that. And I know there's also, and I don't know how, I think there's this brand called Ultra Touch, which uses denim waste to make insulation. So, but
Yeah, at Levi's, we had some of the buildings were insulated with denim.
yeah,
But
our
it's like it only works though if there's not too much of it. So that's
yeah. Yeah. So, and also I think they use denim waste from factories, so they
Mhm.
don't get it from consumers. So that you can't really donate to them. But yeah. Are there specific sustainable materials or brands or practices that you recommend for sewists looking to be more mindful in their projects?
So the only place that I've really done some research about sustainable materials is around thread, because it is the one thing that I buy new. And there actually are kind of starting to come up some more options around whether it's like um, recycled poly, which is still not the best, but an option, or I would Metler. So I use, again, I'm very specific about thread, and I generally use either Orafil for quilting, or Metler is kind of like my favorite thread brand for apparel sewing. And the thread that I've used forever from them is a poly thread,
Mhm.
which again, I don't love. I'm buying it new, but they actually have now a recycled version of it. that I'm gonna try to test out. Um, and there are, so I would say like it is possible to kind of find here and there some materials. I do think you can always kind of look for the two certifications that I look for, if it's organic or GOTS, um, or not organic Okotex, but still, again, those are good if you can see whether it's fabrics or threads or anything, if you can see that they have some type of certification, it's ideal. I'm also kind of, I generally try to look and see just what country stuff was made in, just knowing the apparel industry and kind of understanding that different, I mean, it's not a blanket statement, but if it was made in Japan, it's probably going to be, and you're probably going to know by the price too. And that's what's hard is I would say, yes, there are sustainable options out there. It's generally going to cost a lot more.
Yeah, and
And
I think that's also part of the buy less stuff. Like you don't have to buy more all the time. You can have that. You can just be more discerning in what you purchase.
yeah, well, and what I try to do is I don't tell other people to never buy new. I know that for a lot of people that's not realistic, but I say like balance out. So maybe you buy less new stuff, but you're investing a little bit more, buying things that are a little bit better quality, and then you buy secondhand where you're going to actually find better quality for less. It's just going to be harder to find. And to your point, the like, I know that there's a lot of feelings about Joann's closing. And the thing that I see the most is that people are concerned that they won't be able to find whatever they want, at any moment in time and have that convenience of it. But so I volunteer at Scrap in San Francisco, which is a creative reuse center. And there's East Bay Depot for creative reuse in the East Bay. I think there's actually a place in Alameda, Recrafting.
Crafting company. Yeah.
Yeah, so there are even just in the Bay Area and all over places to find secondhand. And at Scrap, like I'm in charge of kind of sorting and dealing with all the sewing stuff that comes in and fabrics. And amazing stuff comes in all the time. You just, if you're looking for something specific, you have to wait a little bit longer, or you just have to kind of keep an open mind about what it is you're looking for. But you are going to be able to find stuff less expensive.
Absolutely. We also at the sewing room have an Etsy shop, and we sell that. We get a lot of donations actually from people who are from a lot of elderly women who've collected
Yeah.
clothes and just don't have time to make everything that they have, or from families who had someone pass away who's had a fabric collection in addition to a yarn collection. So we try to take those textiles and get them into the hands of the right people. And like the document that you just created was a fabulous resource for that too. And yeah, the thing I've been hearing is that people just they want to be able to touch and feel it first. And I think, yeah, it's a riskier purchase, but also you can go around and resell it somewhere else. Uh,
Yeah.
yeah,
Well,
so
and that's what's interesting too about quilting is a lot because most people use quilting cotton. Quilting cottons don't vary that much, so you kind of don't need to touch them. I think there's some things that lend themselves better to buying online versus in person, or like the more experience you have sewing, the more you kind of know, oh, that's a cotton lawn. I know how that's going to drape. I know how that's going to kind of feel. Um, but I think that also kind of comes with experience.
yeah, a lot of new sewers don't necessarily have that experience with different textiles. What advice would you give someone who loves fashion but wants to approach it in a more ethical and sustainable way?
So I think what I've seen some people talk about is trying to build a sustainable wardrobe. And I think that you have to the idea that you need to create something new to be sustainable is is the first thing that I would say, don't think about it that way. Because it's so easy to be sustainable because the most sustainable thing, and I know this sounds cheesy, but it is true, is using what you have. So if you're like super interested in fashion, I mean, to me, fashion is about like self-expression and it's about being unique. And the designers out there that have been really successful and make a mark are because they are unique. So this idea of buying all the same stuff as other people, to me, that's not even fashion. So what I would challenge is figure out what you have and figure out how, yes, you can follow a trend. Yes, you can know what's going out there, but the skills, work on the skills of how you would use what you have to express yourself, to participate in a trend, to kind of be part of that fashion world, which I think is very possible. Again, it does take some skills, and that's where I do think that the ability to mend and the ability to do alterations are hands down like more important if you want to um, kind of create fashion or kind of be creative and participate in that way, because that's what, versus buying new things, the ability to transform something you have is going to be like the best way to do it in a sustainable way.
Yeah, I was just having this conversation with one of our students yesterday because we had an upcycling class, and and I was telling them that in the 40s, during the war, they put out these books where they would tell you how to restyle your clothes. And it was like a textbook for doing that. So how to transform your husband's suit because he's off at war, and
Mhm.
you want to transform it into a women's suit because you have to go to work now. You know, so that is something that we don't really, that we haven't had to deal with in a long time. But I think that's we're going to be coming up against that right now in
Yeah,
climate, and it's something like we're not going to be able to get clothes as easily as we have been also. So I think, I mean, it could be a little bit of a silver lining in all this craziness that's going out in the world, is that we're going to be forced to be more sustainable. But yeah, yeah.
so yeah, I you brought up a really good point because, and I kind of alluded to this before, but I believe, so strongly believe, and I've talked to a lot of other quilt artists that have the same feeling, that the worst thing you can do for creativity is have access to everything. Like that the necessity of being limited and trying to make do is going to make you make so much cooler things than the ability to just be able to get whatever you want whenever you want. And I do, it's a little bit of a shift, but like for me, the coolest stuff I've made is when I have something small and I'm trying to solve what to do with it or how to use it. It's just like so much more interesting. So I agree. I think like, right, to your point, we haven't needed to be resourceful as
Yeah.
a country when it comes to clothes, because clothes have not, they just keep getting cheaper and cheaper. But like, I think it could be interesting when people are actually kind of forced to make do, because I feel like it'll create a lot of, I don't know, better stuff.
More interesting stuff for sure.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's how I feel about it too. Um, for sewists and students considering a career in fashion, what should they know about the industry today in terms of sustainability challenges and opportunities?
So I really don't want to sound too negative. I'm like really like it really I
Yep.
really try to approach sustainability in like a positive, like let's make it fun way rather than just tell everybody how terrible everything is, because that also I don't think helps anybody like feeling guilty or like shamed. But basically, you just got to know that the apparel industry is not sustainable. Even a sustainable brand, where we are in the world with the fact that we have like enough clothes out there to clothe the next 7 generations of people, or all these crazy statistics, making we don't need to make new clothes. Anybody who's like trying to make a bunch of new clothes is not sustainable. But again, it's kind of like that doesn't mean though that it's all bad. And even when I say I don't buy new clothes, I'll support local designers. So I think that you my point is like you have to go in with your eyes open. You can't be kind of over idealistic, because even again at Levi's, a company that cares about sustainability, I would see some people on the design team getting so beaten down because they just so much wanted to like make these changes and affect the company. And at the end of the day, it's about profits. And yeah, they're going to make, they're going to make sure that they're not doing anything too bad, but you have to understand the system that you're working in. And I would say this is so when I left Levi's, I was so burnt out. I was so burnt out because I'm a fairly also idealistic person and just want to do what's right and good. And a little bit of my time was spent there just banging my head against a wall, which didn't change anything and didn't help me. So yeah, my absolute biggest piece of advice is it is great to go get a job in the apparel industry, to learn about what's happening, to participate, to get to travel, to see how things are made. But you just have to understand that there is only so much you can do to change things. That being said, I also believe I believe in changing things from the inside. So I do, and that's kind of why I work with like everyone in the quilting industry, even though the quilting industry is totally focused on like new fabric and new fabric launches. But I do think that the way that we can create actual change is by being in those companies, by bringing a voice um, to like rooms where maybe that voice isn't there. And so, for example, there is a giant industry trade show coming up in May called H&H Americas in the craft industry. It is all companies showing their new product to like a wholesale show. There is no reason why I need to be there, but I'm going. And then because I'm going, the person that's putting the show on is going to have I'm going to be on a panel where we're talking about sustainability in the craft industry. And it's kind of like being able to bring, if you're someone who cares about sustainability, being able to bring that voice and that perspective into a company where you're there kind of helping make decisions and making things run, I think is very valuable. You just have to protect yourself. And you can't believe that you are going to be able to change how a multi-million billion dollar company runs. So it is, and I know that that sounds a little bit of like a downer, but I think it's true if you're looking at like large companies. I would say if you're like, oh my gosh, I do not want to do that, then do your research, because there are some really interesting sustainable brands or companies out there doing different things. And they're hard to find, and some of them have been closing. But it I do think it so there's this brand ELV Denim, which is super interesting. And what they do is everything they do is upcycled, but it's like very fashion brand. and they're super cool. I bet they have a team of like 5 people. But so I think there are these like little pockets because people in the fashion industry, design industry care about this and want to be doing this. It's just hard to make it profitable. So I do think it's worth, if you really, really care, to search. I would also say if you're looking at a larger company, do your research there too. Like look at a an organization like Remake, where they put out yearly kind of reports on larger fashion brands and report on kind of how they're doing from workers' rights and sustainability and all these different things. So you can kind of get an idea if the company you're going to work for, you know, has any of these things in place. So there are ways to do it. You just have to keep your eyes open and be thoughtful about it.
If someone wanted to transition from being a consumer to a more conscious creator, what are three practical steps they could take to build a more sustainable wardrobe or business?
So I mentioned this earlier, but I would say the first one is the skills that I would focus on are mending and altering. So, and this is more like whether you're just trying to be a more sustainable, like have a more sustainable wardrobe, or you want to do something like you want to do like content creation in that realm, the things that are going to be the most important and resonate with people um, are the idea of changing what you have. So the very first thing I would do is just inventory your wardrobe, like understand all the different things that you have, because that's going to be your materials. That's going to be like what you build your business or your wardrobe on, is literally what you have in your house today. And that's the most sustainable. That's the most, I think, inspiring to other people. Like if you can show people, I have this like crappy, I don't know, shirt I got at wherever a couple years ago, but I'm going to do something really cool to it. Like that, I mean, if you really look at, say, on social media, on TikTok or whatever, what is what type of content gets the most views, the most engagement, it tends to be repurposing, reusing. And what's so positive about that is it doesn't require a lot of investment or money to do. Yeah, a lot of people go to a thrift store and buy something to repurpose it, but you have all those things in your house. So, like inventorying what you have. And then if you're going to take sewing classes or kind of want to practice um, like different skills, mending, whether it's visible mending or invisible, and alterations, I think are just going to be super, super key. Um, and then I think the last one is, and this is easiest and hardest at the same time, is just make a decision kind of about like what your definition of sustainability is, like what you feel comfortable doing. Because as I said before, sustainability, it's a always changing. I mean, some people don't even like using that word anymore because what does it really mean? So I think you just need to decide what works for you. Whether you want to talk about, so I talk a lot about circularity, which is now kind of replace sustainability sometimes, but it, as I mentioned it before, it's the idea of the life cycle of the garment. So how, rather than just say, what's this new thing, how do you keep the life going on and keep evolving that thing over and over? But you need to kind of decide like what your perspective is, what works for you, and it's not going to be like, the same as anyone else, and that's totally okay. And it's probably going to evolve and change as you keep working, which is, I change my mind about stuff every day. I have a new perspective about thread or a new perspective about, materials, and you kind of in the sustainability world, whether you're in the corporate world or doing it for fun, that's just going to happen because it is such like a undefinable term.
Thank you so much for this conversation. I think it's so important to bring this this conversation into our everyday life as much as possible.
Yeah, of course. I always love talking about it.
That was a really insightful conversation with Radha from Sewing with Fog. I'm going to link all of Radha's information in the show notes below. It's the Sewing Through Fog blog. So sewingthroughfog.com. It's fantastic. You really have to check it out. Her work is phenomenal. That being said, here are some of the takeaways from our conversation. Sew sustainably, start small. Many materials can be bought secondhand. We have lots of secondhand shopping here in the East Bay and the San Francisco Bay Area. There's Scrap and SF. Radha actually volunteers there. There's the East Bay Depot for Creative Reuse, the Recrafting Company here in Alameda. And then also at the Sewing Room, we have an Etsy shop where we sell dead stock fabric and trims and all sorts of goodies. You'll have to check it out. In the meantime, the other things you can do are reducing your textile waste. So quilting lends itself perfectly to using lots of scraps, or rather quilt piecing. So you'll notice in a lot of Radha's work that she uses quilt piecing to create her art with denim. It's really a fabulous way to use your scraps and to create something unique and unusual. Look into textile recycling programs like Ridwell here in California and the Pacific Northwest. They do textile recycling as well as all sorts of other great recycling things. You can repurpose your scraps in many other ways, like stuffing pillows, making a big poof and stuffing it with. So Radha mentions stuffing things, and I think that's a great idea. When you stuff things with your little tiny scraps, I think Bernadette Banner calls them like cabbage. She has cabbage and she has another size that she does, and she saves that stuff for when she has to stuff things. And I think it's a great use of your actual little textile waste, which is harder and harder to recycle. Choose better materials. Fabrics made in Japan are most likely going to be more sustainable than fabrics that you buy that are made in China. So something to consider when you're buying new fabrics. Buy secondhand fabrics from, like I said before. Also, you can try using different kinds of thread. The higher quality thread you use, the better it is going to be for your machine, and it's also going to last longer in your projects. Mettler, which is a German company, has a recycled poly thread, which is, they're actually recycling the polyester before they turn it into thread. So that's pretty cool. And Orifil cotton quilting thread. Make fashion more sustainable. Mend and alter and repurpose what you already own. That's probably the most important takeaway from this whole conversation. And I completely agree with Radha on this one. Your closet is full of things already. And if you can try to make those things last, that's even better. Like Vivienne Westwood said, buy less, choose well, make it last. The fashion industry and change. Okay, so the fashion industry in and of itself is technically not very sustainable. Even sustainable brands have challenges with sustainability. It's very hard when you're manufacturing new things, considering that we already have a world full of clothes that we don't wear. But if you are interested in pursuing fashion as a career, I love fashion. I get it. I'm part of it. You can get involved with small ethical brands that align with your values. If you decide to go into a big organization, a big company that manufactures for profit, then you're going to find it harder to affect change on a big scale. It's just harder when it's a bigger company. And that being said, like Radha mentions in our discussion, Change does happen from the inside. So there is probably something you can do to affect some change in that situation. Well, thank you so much for listening and watching this video. If you want more information on mending and upcycling classes and learning how to sew, please visit our website at thesewingroomalameda.com/specialty class schedule. And if you enjoyed this video, please give us a thumbs up and hit subscribe. It really helps us out. Thanks for watching and happy sewing, everyone.